Hello, wrestling fans of the world. I am Skylar Mars, and this is Mars TV with special guest, YouTube animator Captain Mckay. Captain, thank you for coming on. I've watching you for at least a couple years now.
I'm happy to hear it, man. Thanks for having me on your show.
No problem. I remember the very first video that I saw out of you was Brett versus Angle.
Ah, yeah, that was the first full-length one I ever made.
And that just kind of started a chain, I assume.
It was, yeah. I mean, it was that. It was, I got stuff falling over. Sorry if you heard any of that. But it was, yeah, that started kind of me seeing the possibility of doing a bunch of other stuff after the fact. And I'm like, people liked Bret Hart and Kurt Angle because I guess the fascination of these two that have never actually wrestled before, they get to see kind of how one scenario that would play out. I'm like, that's cool. Let me see what else I can do with this. And so I just kept right on going.
Now, I remember you had kind of a little mini documentary on yourself. You said it started with, what'd you call it, Picture Fed?
Yeah, well, let's see. It was all done on free web. Continued the idea from and just got into animating from there.
All right, I'm gonna get out of the way what is probably the most annoying question I could possibly ask you. I'm gonna do it in my best voice, so forgive me. Where's Collision?
How far in are we? 2 minutes? I was let's see how long it takes. I didn't have a.
I wanted to get it out of the way because honestly, I understand how long this takes. I used to do this a little bit, and making videos just in general takes forever. I'd done the Burnout interview a week prior,
Yeah.
But I just wanted to get out of the way just because I knew that somebody in the comments, and I'd been asked all over Twitter, when I interview you, what are you going to ask him? And Where's Collision was 5 of them. So I just want to get it out of the way so we can talk about more important things.
Absolutely, man. No, I wish I had a better answer for you than I just haven't started it. I kind of took a fall off of wrestling after the beginning of 2014 rolled around, and I just burned myself out on wrestling at that point because the entire year prior I'd been basically doing nothing but wrestling, and I was just ready for a change. And unfortunately, it was just bad timing because I've been hyping up this main event for the better part of a year, and then I'm just all right, well, JK, not doing it yet. So, now I'm everybody who asks me where Collision is, they're coming from a place of this is nobody's fault but yours, basically. And I'm you know what, you're right, it is my fault. So, unfortunately, I still don't have an answer for you. So I'm sorry to your audience who was hoping for something better.
You know what? That's perfectly all right, man. This is supposed to be kind of a casual talk show, so I'm not putting any blame on anyone. Just wanted to get that question out of the way because it's literally the first thing I had written down because it was the first thing asked.
Dude, yeah, the last couple of videos that I put up on my channel that have had nothing to do with wrestling, there's still the majority of comments have something to do with oh, cool, but where's Collision? Thanks. All right, good.
Speaking of just not where Collision is, but just the question, where's Collision? Where'd you come up with having Wolverine be the IWC?
I just needed somebody to do a walk-on role and basically serve as the mouthpiece of all these impatient YouTube fans. He didn't necessarily have to start as the IWC, but he kind of took that form later on. But basically, I just was dealing with so many people. At that time, I was doing all my JWF shows pretty much once a month. And, stuff like Warzone would take me a while to do, but it would wind up being sometimes 7, 8, 9 minutes. So they weren't short animations. They took a lot of time, but people would watch one and then think there was going to be another one ready to go the next day. And I'm nah, it doesn't really work like that,
No, not at all.
I get the impatient comments, and so Wolverine was essentially my way of making fun of these impatient people. And then he just took on a personality all his own. Now he's at the point where he's a selling point of my whole channel, basically, is people want to see how he's going to come in and just harass the captain on screen,
So let's go back a little bit. You're burnt out. Is that your words? I'm just asking. You're burnt out on wrestling for now?
I mean, I'm kind of coming away from it a bit now. That's, with that said, I still got a bunch of stuff that I've started and I'm in the middle of finishing, so it's not I'm just gonna start Collision tomorrow or anything. But
oh no,
yeah, like I said, I'd gone the stretch of about a year doing pretty much nothing but wrestling, and pretty much full-length wrestling matches. Probably did about 8 that whole year or so. So I mean, it was a long process, and at the end of it all, like I had gotten an independent contract deal with WWE to like produce a certain amount of animations for them. Now these were short, but this was also like right at the tail end of doing that whole stretch of all this other stuff too. So I was just kind of like, man, more wrestling. Like it started to feel like more like a chore and a job than actually like a fun hobby for me. So I was like, I gotta just step back from this for a little while.
Do you still watch though?
No, not really. I mean, like I don't dislike wrestling like the way many actual wrestling fans seem to just hate wrestling for some reason, which I'll never understand. But I don't watch a lot of the current product just because I don't have cable. Like I'll pick up a match or two here and there on YouTube, but if somebody's like raving about a match being great on Twitter or whatever, I'll be like, that seems like it could be cool. Like for example, I guess Kevin Owens and Dean Ambrose on the Royal Rumble was like really good, so I've been meaning to check that out. But basically I just go by word of mouth. What my friends tell me, like, hey, you really need to check this out, and I'll go back and watch it. But I'm not like a regular viewer anymore. I probably haven't been since about 2004.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Could have fooled me actually.
Well, I mean, it's easy to keep up when everybody kind of goes on social media and pretty much is up to the minute coverage with everything that's going on,
That makes perfect sense. Now, let's talk about X-Men Brotherhood for a second. You just released a new episode of that, right?
That's coming this weekend, actually. I released the teaser for it.
Oh, that was what I saw. I hadn't gotten a chance to watch it yet. How did that start? Like, you just decided to do an X-Men show, which is really, really cool, because DGDX does, Justice Assembled, which is cool, but where did the idea come from? Because I think yours came earlier.
Brotherhood did come before Justice. I'm trying to remember exactly what got me wanting to do something with the X-Men. I've just always been a fan, and this was like before I went back and did like JWF One Night Only and everything. So I was like doing a few different things at the time, and I was just trying to like expand past doing only wrestling on my channel. And so I was like, I got all these Marvel superhero figures laying around. I might as well do something with them. I've always liked the X-Men, and it's a diverse enough cast where I can actually like change up certain characters and have that kind of effect going where like certain scenes will be about different characters and everything, and it's not always going to be following the same person. So it's like, sure, let's give it a shot. And then I wound up writing this kind of long, drawn out, elaborate story, and I'm like, this could take me a while. And as is evidence, I guess, by it's been like 3 years and I've gotten like 3 episodes done. So I'm like, well, at least I had that part down. But
and I noticed in I noticed in another one of your videos, actually a lot of your videos, you had Mike Hagar show up, which I fanboyed a little bit for because I love Final Fight, and I actually played Saturday Night Slam Masters, which is so much fun.
Oh, great, man.
I like old video games. But are you a gamer?
I like video games, but I wouldn't call myself a gamer. See, I had the luxury of living with a roommate who kept up with all the games, so he would always be playing different stuff on PS4 and whatever. Like, I used to love video games up until I probably had everything up until like Nintendo 64, and that was like the last system that I had like a big collection of games for. And for whatever reason, I just kind of fell off after that. Like, I had PS2 and I would play occasionally, but like not, I guess, I don't want to say the appeal wore off because I really do like gaming. I just don't do it as much for whatever reason. But like I said, my roommate would pick up all this stuff, so I was able to keep up with a lot of this stuff. Like, I've played all the Arkham games, and I played some of the other ones that have interested me over the years. But going back to Hagar, like, Final Fight was one of the first games I got for Super Nintendo, and I just loved it so much. And so I've like been following along with the character. Granted, he hasn't been up to a whole lot, a few beat 'em ups and then Marvel vs. Capcom, but I was for whatever reason I was just always drawn to the character because I'm like, here's this basically action hero guy who's just trying to like live a normal life as a politician, and then all this stuff happens, and so his solution is just to beat up everybody in town. And like, well, all right, seems like it works, so take it.
That's actually really funny. I'm just curious because the way you portray him just seems like the way anyone else portrayed him. He showed up once in one of Burnout's videos, and it almost seemed to be like exactly like yours. So is this just like the character you think, the way people portray him, or do you think maybe like that maybe a specific instance was inspired by yours?
I wouldn't be surprised if Burnout thought similarly about Hagar the way I do. Like, I know he told me he wanted to do something like that and asked me if I would do the voice for the character. I was like, hell yeah, man. Like, I loved Hagar, and just bringing more Hagar into the world is never a bad idea. So anything I can help with, great. And Burnout has become, a pretty good friend of mine over the past year or two, I guess, of being in touch on Facebook and YouTube and all that kind of stuff. But just being able to bring more Hagar into the world, I guess, is fun. And as for, just what people kind of think of him, it's like there's really not a whole ton of stuff to go off of. It's not like a Street Fighter character, really, where they have like these long and intertwining developed backstories that kind of have become the canon over the years. Like, Hagar is just kind of more of a minor character, so people can pretty much interpret him how they want, and I guess a lot of people maybe don't put as much thought into it.
So let's take a step back for a minute. You do a lot of voice acting. I kind of just from remembering this now. I didn't really have it written down. I'm kind of just remembering this now. Because you play Sheik on Mega Powers, correct?
Yes, that's me.
So what's it like being a part of this kind of community? It's just like you all kind of have very similar personalities. It's almost just like it only makes sense that you guys would do these kinds of things together. What is it like being a part of that little community?
It's, it's really cool. It's not something that if you would ask me 5 years ago, I would have ever seen happen. Like, I guess I was kind of in the mindset where, like, I didn't really think that you could make, like, friends and build a community, like, via, like, the internet or YouTube or whatever. I just kind of thought, like, well, that's just kind of for weird people who play Warcraft in their basement or whatever, and I just kind of dismissed the whole thing. But now that I've actually done it, and I'm like, man, these are most of the people not only that I'm interacting with on YouTube, but just outside of just talking about our videos and stuff, we're pretty much in touch on a weekly or sometimes even more often than that. Like, just I don't know, it's really kind of cool, and having similar interests with all these people and doing our own kind of variations and interpretations of the characters in our videos it's fun. And I think a lot of people that watch maybe like all of our channels can like start pinpointing who does what voices at this point, because a lot of us play the same characters in each other's stuff. For example, BGDX plays Deadpool in my X-Men videos, and I do Wolverine in his Justice Assembled and stuff like that, while also doing them in my own. So you just start to hear the similarities, and you can kind of pick out who knows who on YouTube, I guess.
Sorry.
Sure.
Yeah. Is there anything that you do kind of outside of, stop motion? Because that is quite literally the entirety of your channel, other than sometimes screwing around with your buddies and playing games. I mean, when did this become different? I guess my question is, when did it become, like, a hobby as compared to, like, something that had a fan base?
For me, it's always been a hobby. Like, I don't know if your audience knows this, but I'm one of the old guys. I'm 31 right now. So, like, I've been fascinated with animation for years, and only in probably about the past, let's say, 5 or 6 years have I actually had the technology to do it myself. Like, I remember being a kid and trying to do it with a VCR and, like, with, like, a big Panasonic VHS camcorder, and using, like, those old Kenner Batman figures that move at the shoulders and the hips, and you get nothing else out of them. So, I mean, like, this has been, pretty much, this sounds ridiculous, but I've waited my whole life to be able to do stuff like this as a hobby. So, I guess I've always looked at it as a hobby, honestly. And when I got onto YouTube and started doing, like, some wrestling stuff, I realized, like, oh, hey, there's a lot of people doing this. And from there, I kind of was like, well, let's see what else other people are doing. So I'd look at, like, Batman videos or, just different superhero stuff. And I'm like, geez, man, I never really sat back and thought about how many other people there are out there like me doing the same kind of things. And, that's kind of where I started being more fascinated with it, seeing that there was actually a huge audience for it.
To the idea of a lot of people having similar interests and superhero videos, are you an avid, like, comic book reader?
I do read comic books, but for me it's kind of like video games. It's the same kind of thing where I go in, like, phases with comics. Like, I actually just bought a stack last week, but that was the first time I spent money on comic books in about maybe like a year. So it's like it comes and goes. I do try and keep up with a lot of the stuff that I do like, but it's like anything else. You get distracted with spending money on something different, or you just fall off for whatever reason. But yeah, I would say that I am a fan of comic books.
Anything specific?
Well, the X-Men. I've pretty much been on and off of the X-Men ever since I was a kid, and that's right around the time when there's like the Jim Lee X-Men #1 that came out, and like that Fox, like, yeah, it was Fox, the Fox TV show, the cartoon it was on. So it was that like whole team of X-Men. I read a lot of that throughout the '90s, and then Batman, obviously. Excuse me. I tried to keep up with Batman like over the years. I kind of fell off of the new like 52 stuff when that started, but I'm trying to think of what else. Like Ninja Turtles, I didn't get into the comics until I was already an adult, but I was always familiar with the Turtles because I watched the cartoon as a kid and I knew all the characters and everything. So getting to see like kind of their origins and the more modern comics, like that was always fascinating to me over the past couple of years. So I picked up some of that. That's pretty much everything I've followed religiously, I guess, as comics go.
So that begs me to a question. Is there anything you felt that like you would like to do but you've not even started yet? Like, I'm not talking about more Godzilla Aftermath, more X-Men Brotherhood, but I mean like any other products you haven't started yet.
Yeah, actually, like I would like to do something involving Star Wars, because I've always been a Star Wars fan too, and I had an idea that I came up with about like over a year ago now, and again, just haven't had the time to make it happen. So, but Star Wars is definitely something I'm interested in. I would like to explore maybe a little more like just different superhero things, but just depends on what kind of time I have. I get myself kind of, I don't want to say in a hole, but I get myself like these elaborate ideas, and I'm like, all right, I'm going to stretch this out over 5 episodes or over 6 episodes or whatever. And then I'm like, I really did just commit to doing 5 episodes of this, and I'm on 3, and I'm like, well, I guess I'm not going to start this next project until I'm done with this whole stretch. And I'm like, oh, this is why I think people make much shorter animations than me, and they can get it done and move on to the next thing instead of like being like, oh crap, I got to come up with 2 more episodes of this. How?
All right, next thing I have written down here, I've got a little list of questions that I had planned to ask you, but we've gone off on a couple tangents at this point.
That's fine.
It's because doing this show is fun.
Yeah.
Anyways, Godzilla Aftermath was the next thing I'd like to ask about, because so far I'm really enjoying it. Just the idea of just all this random kaiju stuff. I remember, again, in your mini documentary that you had, you said that one of the things that fascinated you was the original King Kong. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
When did that start? Like, I mean, you're I don't know how to word this. Like, your fascination with the Godzilla movies, I guess.
Well, yeah, like I don't know what it is specifically about Godzilla in general. It started with King Kong because that was kind of the first big monster movie, I guess you could say kaiju movie that I've ever seen, and I was a kid, so I was impressionable for all that stuff. That factored in with the fact that the original one was all done with stop motion too, so that kind of probably jump started a lot of that as well. But I was a couple years older than, well, I probably saw Kong when I was like 4 or 5, and I was probably like 8 or 9 when I started becoming a little more familiar with Godzilla. And for some reason, it was, I think, the same fascination with like big monsters stepping on things and fighting each other and all that kind of thing that kind of carried over from watching the old Kong movie. That now I'm like, oh, Godzilla. I guess Japan's been doing this for all these years too, and they got this whole other roster of characters, and there's all these new interesting things going on. Like, now, I was only going by whatever VHS tapes were available, circa 1994 or whatever that would have been. So I was limited at the time, but whatever I can get my hands on or whatever came on like TNT late at night, I would try and stay up and watch, and that's kind of where that fascination came in.
I noticed a lot of the things so far in this interview that you said lead back to when you were a kid. Do you think that like this is just kind of like what everything is built up to be?
It's interesting now that you mentioned that. I guess I never really thought about it, but you could have a good point there. I think a lot of people probably are, really influenced from being a kid, and just kind of the things that they like then are kind of the things that they're always going to be attached to maybe later on in life. So I've got my Godzilla and my Batman and all that kind of stuff that I pretty much still like now today. I think that's probably one of the things that a lot of like more, I'll say like adult, toy collectors, for example, or adult fans of comic books or any of that kind of stuff, they probably hold on to that kind of stuff because it reminds them of being a kid and you just feel better about it, I suppose. Because I know there's like a lot of people that I knew as maybe like teenagers or young adults where they're getting looked at, but like, what are you doing, still reading comics, man? You got to grow up, get into the real world and everything. And then, somebody like gets to be about 20 and realizes, man, the real world sucks. I just want to be a kid again and go back and play with Batman toys and stuff. So I'm like, well, hey, I'll have it both ways, thanks.
I actually really like your way of looking at things.
Thanks, man.
So I'm kind of close then, I guess.
Hey, man, you're right on the brink. What are you, how old are you?
I'm 18.
Oh, okay, all right. Yeah, you're getting there.
I started this show because it's, as we're getting into the real world, I want to have almost like, I'm kind of trying to start a business here.
I've noticed you have a lot of different things on your channel. I actually went back after you made the post on Twitter about if I would check out, was it the History of Wrestling Volume 1?
Squared Circle Story.
That day. And so, yeah, I was like, all right, this is like literally like going way back hundreds of years. And I'm like, wow, I can't think of somebody who could tell me like who the champion was 10 years ago, let alone now we're talking about Frank Gotch and the hookers. I'm like, Jesus Christ, he's done his homework.
I'll reveal a little bit something for anyone watching this. That was one of the few things on the show I've done so far I did know prior. I did a territory episode after that. I didn't know any of that before doing the show, which I thought that was kind of funny. Is there ever anything that you do that you hadn't thought about it until you started?
There's been certain things that most of the stuff that I do on my channel, I have like at least a functional, I guess, like working knowledge of it going into it. And then if there's something that I got to brush up on, I'll go and like kind of check online and see if there's anything I can come up with. So for example, there was a scene in X-Men Brotherhood that that's coming out, where the Avengers are kind of facing off against Magneto. So there were certain things I was like, well, let's see. What did Magneto's powers cover, and what Avengers would and would not be affected by this? So I was like, I want this scene to make sense, but I also don't want somebody being like, oh, that wouldn't happen, and here's why. So I kind of have to like think about stuff like that, like accuracy to the source material, before I go into animating a scene, for example. And I heard all about this when I did Superman versus Thor a while back, and to this day, there's still like great controversy over whether or not Superman should be able to lift up Thor's hammer or not. And that's one of those things that's just like kind of left up to the discretion of the viewer, I think. I just went my own way with it. If you were to make that video tomorrow, you might go in a totally separate direction with it. And that's, I think, what's kind of fun about the fantasy element of it all.
That's one cool thing about fantasy is that there really isn't a right answer. Is there ever at a time you see someone, not IWC, I'm just talking fans in general, who like, They say something that almost kind of like, it just doesn't make sense anymore. It just almost seems like internet rambling.
That's a good question too. I know that a lot of the, for example, like if we're talking about like my animation and stuff, like a lot of the wrestling matches I've done, most people can look at it objectively and just be like, all right, that was cool, it was well put together, whatever. But then there's occasionally little people will come in and be a fan of the guy who lost my match and tell me that I'm stupid and whatever for like not making him win the match and that he would have kicked out of this move. And I'm like, I guess that kind of ties in more with IWC though. So, yeah, I mean, I haven't really come across anything that I guess, read and has been like, man, that makes no sense what this guy's saying. I don't understand. Like, it's just, it all basically boils down to what their opinion, I guess, would be.
So let me get this story right if I have it.
All right.
You went from a kid who just liked playing with action figures, you were just like not a geek per se, but you read comic books, you watch monster movies, you watch wrestling, and then now later you've almost kind of become, I want to say a public figure for that, like a YouTube celebrity. I'm not trying to say that like bootlick or anything, but That's kind of what you've become. Is that weird for you?
Um, Not necessarily. Like it hasn't. Like if I was actually like a YouTube celebrity, like to the level of some of these guys playing Minecraft and all that kind of stuff and making millions, like then it might be weird for me, especially for doing the stuff that I'm doing now presently. Like if this were to suddenly take off tomorrow and I wake up and I have like 10 million subscribers overnight or something, I'd be like, well, this is going to have to take some adjusting. But like for me, it's been kind of a more gradual build up. That and I've been, well, I mean, for the most part, I keep my face like off of YouTube. Like, I mean, there are videos where I'm just like, obviously sitting in a chair talking and stuff, but the average person that I would walk by on the street would have no idea who I am. So, I mean, if that ever started happening, if people were able to identify it, then I'd be like, yeah, okay, this is unusual. I'm gonna have to kind of like readjust to some of this. But as for being like kind of a public spokesperson for this kind of thing, I'm totally cool with that because, in my opinion, like you said, geek before, and that makes that brings out certain negative connotations that I think probably a lot of people would think of. Like you think of like kind of a stereotypical like nerd from a TV show with like the white shirt and the glasses and all that kind of stuff. But nowadays, with all the Avenger movies out and with all the stuff that's like kind of in the public eye, it's very much geek culture, I guess, is its own thing now, and everybody's kind of more welcoming to that. So, I mean, it's kind of become like a renaissance almost. Like everybody's kind of like okay with it.
Is that? I mean, I'm 18 here, so I gotta ask: is that different from when you were a kid?
Well, when I was a kid, if you say, for example, if you're going to go to a comic book movie this year, you got your choices of like Civil War or Deadpool or, X-Men, Apocalypse or Batman, Superman, and all that kind of stuff. And, hit or miss, all these things are like huge and they got all this hype behind them. Now, for me as a kid, my choice would have been like Batman and Robin or something, and it's like totally different marketing, all totally different kind of like demographic for it. Like basically people thought you were just ridiculous if you're going to go see this Batman and Robin movie after like, and that was even after like the first Batman movie had come and gone and been all this, made this huge success in the, the comic book movie industry, I guess. So it's definitely like people have figured out all these years later that like, hey, there's a lot of money in this and there's a lot of marketability and we can make this work for us. So yeah, I think it has like evolved to that effect where it's more socially like not only acceptable, but it's almost like expected that a lot of people are going to go see these movies now compared to maybe 15, 20 years ago.
Now, I've got a question that I had written down here that I thought would be really interesting to ask. So,
Yeah, sure.
in the 1980s, it was the single biggest time to be a wrestling fan because Hulk Hogan was all the rage, etc. And the Attitude Era was almost the same thing. Now, I know you're kind of off and off watching wrestling, but do you think that anything that happened in the comic book industry could happen to wrestling?
I think there's always potential for wrestling to get back to a huge boom period because it's always been kind of like hills and valleys with wrestling. Like you mentioned, the 80s with Hulk, Hulkamania and all that kind of stuff was huge. And then you get the late 90s where you have like, on the one hand, you have like the NWO and like WCW just like killing it with the ratings. And then on the other channel, you've got the Attitude Era with Stone Cold and all that kind of stuff. So basically everybody's making money hand over fist. But then you got to consider like the early 90s where nothing is happening. 1993 is notorious for, excuse me, for being like just tragic as far as like money making in WWE. And even pretty much up to and including like the end of 96 was kind of, I don't know, nothing too great was going on. But, they came out of it obviously with the Attitude Era. And to me, I mean, I can only speak from my own experience at this point, but I kind of like fell off, as I said, in like 2004, and they haven't really hooked my interest back yet. But that's not to say that somebody can come along and pretty much revolutionize the modern era of wrestling again. I don't think that they have a star necessarily like lined up for that, the way that like Steve Austin would have done that, or like Hulk Hogan or somebody like that. So, or if they do, he just hasn't like had a chance to let his star shine yet.
Speaking of having, I guess, a star shine, does it ever really, like, do you actually care, like, how many subscribers you have, Twitter followers, etc.? Because, like, some people take that very, very seriously. Do you personally?
necessarily. Like, for me, it's not really about the subscribers and that kind of stuff. Like, I've been lucky that I guess I could say my subscribers have, for the most part, been on board with a lot of the stuff that I'm doing. I mean, there's a huge section that only wants to see wrestling, and that's pretty much what I've come to expect now. That, you know, every single subscriber I have is not going to watch every video I do. That's just the reality of it all. So I've been lucky enough to connect with, like, just certain people out of my audience. Like, for every video I put up, I know I can count on the same, like, 10 or 15 people to, like, comment. And these are the people that I've interacted with the most over the years. So it's cool. It's like, you know, basically I'm making this video for myself, and these other guys will watch it and they'll let me know what they think. And if a couple other 100,000 whatever other people watch it, that's great too. But I mean, for me, like, Twitter and all that kind of stuff is just kind of like secondhand. Like, you'll notice me on Twitter is not necessarily exclusive to, like, what I'm doing on YouTube. Like, it's just, you know, I'll put off, like, whatever random thoughts I happen to be thinking, or, you know, comment on something that has nothing to do with animation or wrestling or any of that kind of stuff.
Like Tool songs being really long.
Yeah, that one song, man, I mean, this is a whole other topic. I'll get away from all that. But, yeah, I do know a lot of people who take it seriously. Like, everything seems to be pointed in the direction of promoting themselves and their channel. And, you know, I'm cool with it. That's fine, because that's their hustle, you know? But for me, like, you know, I'm just happy to have, like, a handful of people that I can interact with on a regular basis.
All right, so we're winding down on the clock here, and I have one last question to ask that I think this is kind of a tricky one for anyone.
All right.
Who is Captain Mckay?
Ooh. Let's see. Wow, I wouldn't have expected this question to be a tricky one for me, but I guess you could say he's a guy who knows what he likes. He's not ashamed or afraid of what he likes. He puts it out there in the world and lets people make their own judgments as to whether or not they want to join him in what he likes. And, you know, he has above average hair quality.
Nice.
Thank you.
All right, well, first, I'd like to thank you very much for coming on to the show. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I agree, definitely, man. Thanks for having me.
And, you know, good luck with, you know, the things that you do. And, God, I don't mean to be bootlicking here, but I just really hope that whatever you're doing next, just, it's successful.
Thank you, man. I'm actually really looking forward to, right now on the table, I'm finishing up with Batman versus Terminator, and then I gotta do all the sound editing. And I think that one's going to be cool. I had a lot of fun with this one. And then next week, you know, as I say, X-Men's ready to go. So it's all uphill from here, I guess.
All right, well, again, thank you for coming on the show. This has been Mars TV. I'm Skylar Mars. This is Captain Mckay. Thank you for watching.